Good morning, everybody. All right. Acts chapter 8. And it kind of segues into Acts chapter 8. Even though we finished Acts 7, but Acts 7 kind of starts in Acts 6, and Acts 7 kind of ends in Acts 8. And so we kind of moved over this quickly yesterday. And so I'm just going to go down here and back up maybe a tiny bit, because it says in verse 58 of chapter 7, it says, "The witnesses laid down their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul." And so that's our segue. Hey, and good morning, everybody out there who is up and about. So it says in verse 1 now, "Now Saul was consenting to his death. At the time a great persecution arose against the church, which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. And devout men carried Stephen to his burial and made great lamentation over him. As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering every house and dragging off men and women, committing them to prison." So, what's interesting is that Jesus gave the apostles a commission. It was a great one, too. And when he did this, he told them to go preach, right? Throughout Jerusalem, Judea, and all of Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Well, what's interesting is that it talks about the church was in Jerusalem. That's all the church was. And it's funny how, all of us, I think, we can begin down a road of obedience, not deviating, but not progressing. So it's like God explains what he wants for us, right? And so it's like, hey, I want you guys to do this, do this, do this. And it's part of our growth as Christians, right? That we begin in little things and we begin to become faithful in those little things. And God wants to move us up to bigger and better things. And it seems as if the apostles who were there on the day of Christ's ascension, when he tells them to go and wait in Jerusalem for the promise of the Father, and then he'll give them power so that they may be witnesses, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth, Acts 1:8, and they're still in Jerusalem. Now the church is growing like crazy, but that ultimately wasn't what Christ wanted. He didn't want it just to grow, he wanted it to spread. Now, how much time has gone by? Scholars debate that, but a matter of a few years have gone by so far. It seems like we're just reading through a few chapters of the book of Acts, but years have passed. And during this time, we know that the church in Jerusalem has grown to thousands upon thousands of members. But what about everywhere else that hasn't heard the gospel? This reminds me a little bit about, in the 1700s, there was great missionary movements, and you see this great missionary period. William Carey, the father of modern missions, you see the revival that started with the Moravians, and it was a modest-sized church, but they sent out hundreds of missionaries. They were just continually sending missionaries all over the world because they realized it wasn't about them and it wasn't about their church. It was about the Great Commission. And so sometimes when we get settled, I think we find a good groove. Maybe you're really good at children's ministry, right? Maybe you're really good at doing something. And so we get in this rut of obedient Christian service, right? Like, I'm doing good things. And we forget that God had called us to great things. And maybe we have a prayer life, but not the type of intercession that God maybe would want for us. And so God will then do something. And so what happens here? Persecution comes to the church. And when the persecution comes, it scatters the church. They were called to go out, and they didn't. And again, they were doing so many good things. It's sometimes easy for us to just lose track. God, I'm doing lots of good for you, but am I maybe holding back from something? Maybe I'm a little scared. Because I'll tell you what, guys, when you got a great church in Jerusalem going good, you don't want to leave and be a church planter. And so God stirs it up a little bit. God sends something into their midst, and this something was a guy by the name of Saul of Tarsus. It says in verse 3 how he made havoc of the church. Havoc, lumino. It's a word that is used, like if you go to the root of the word, it describes like a wild boar running through an encampment, just tearing it all to pieces, right? It's this idea of a wild beast just running around frantically. That was Saul. I like how J. Vernon McGee used to say, when you throw a rock into a pack of dogs, the one that yelps the loudest is probably the one you hit. And so Stephen's dying sermon probably had an impact on Saul, right? And it's probably the fact that he was convicted, that he went around fighting so much. And sometimes when we witness the friends and family members, it's the ones who actually fight are sometimes the ones who are actually the most impacted. They're the ones because they have to put up their defenses. But I kind of just want to go and just stick on that first point, though, and then we'll continue to see what happens here with with Philip as he goes to Samaria, and we see the revival there. But have you gotten stuck in a rut? And see, what God will do is He'll send something into your life to help break up the monotony. He'll send something that will force you to maybe be obedient in more things. And I guess that's the key, is that we need to remember, because this is, I'm not trying to beat us up over it, because what they were doing was good, and what I'm doing and you're doing may be good, but still it might be selling ourselves short of what God may desire to do in us. They could have been so caught up with the most amazing church this world has ever seen, right there in Jerusalem. But God's like, I know, it's a beautiful church. Everything about that church is just perfect. Maybe, right? But I want a church in the outskirts of Judea. I want a church in Samaria. I want a church up in Antioch. And at that point, they were probably not thinking even for a moment, a church in Antioch like this. But that's going to become the home base. When Jerusalem gets destroyed in 70 AD, it's the church at Antioch really becomes the northern church. There'll be another church down in Alexandria, Egypt. They become the two main churches during the whole early church movement. And so many of the great early church father writings and stuff we have, they've either cycled through those places or they came from those places. And so are we maybe getting too focused on the smaller bubble of what we've got going on? Or are we willing and ready, if God wants to push us out and open up new doors and new horizons and new things? And so if we're unwilling, and maybe it's just because we're distracted by all the good that's taking place, well, God will put an end to the distractions and God will get our attention. I think that's one of the beautiful things, is God doesn't let us just stay where we're at. If we're truly walking in the Spirit, there's never really idle time. In fact, what little quiet time we might get, or those are the times that God is trying to speak to us. But we never get idle time. God is always growing. He's always growing us. He's working in us, and He's pushing us. And so He'll put those things into your life, and He'll do what it takes to get you to grow. And if you're listening, then you might just do it of your own accord. And if not, well, then here, like we just read, He'll send a wild boar into the camp and He'll mess everything up. But then it'll get us start thinking, okay, well, maybe I was too comfortable just on cruise control in life, doing things the way I've always done them. Maybe God, there was more. And I just, I was happy with this, but you wanted to give me that. And so be ready for God throwing these curveballs into your life. and be ready to respond accordingly in prayer, seeking Him, checking it out in the Word, bouncing it off your brothers and sisters, and then just moving forward to the greatness and the fullness of what God would have for you in your life. So, love you guys. Take care. Have a great weekend. And I will see you guys, well, Monday. I will be going on live again. Take care, guys. Goodbye.